I knew something was wrong the moment I smelled it that Tuesday morning in March, standing on my back deck with my coffee, watching the sunrise paint the Tennessee hills orange and gold. The creek that ran through my property, the one I had spent the last 5 years protecting and caring for, smelled like a backed-up toilet. That smell hit me like a punch to the gut, and I nearly dropped my mug. My name is Isaac Zimmerman, and I had moved to this little slice of heaven outside Knoxville 5 years ago, buying 3 acres of wooded property with a beautiful creek running right through the middle of it. The water had always been crystal clear, full of minnows and crawfish, with deer coming down to drink in the early mornings. I'd spent weekends clearing trash left by previous owners, planting native plants along the banks, and just enjoying the peace of having my own little ecosystem. It was my sanctuary, my escape from the corporate grind I had left behind in Nashville. But that morning, everything was different. I set my coffee down and walked toward the creek, dreading what I was going to find. As I got closer, the smell intensified, making my eyes water. When I reached the bank, I stopped dead in my tracks. The water, my beautiful clear creek water, was brown. Not muddy brown from rain runoff, but a thick, murky brown with chunks of things I did not want to identify floating in it. Toilet paper clung to branches along the water line. The smell was overwhelming, undeniable sewage. I stood there in shock for a solid minute, just staring at the destruction of something I had worked so hard to maintain. Then anger kicked in. This was not natural. This was not an accident. Someone had done this. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures and videos, documenting everything. The brown water, the toilet paper, the foam collecting in eddies along the bank. I walked upstream, following my property line, taking more photos as I went. That is when I found it. Right at the edge of where my property met the new development that had gone up last year, there was a pipe. A 6-inch PVC pipe sticking out of the bank, and brown water was pouring out of it directly into my creek. The pipe was not even hidden, just brazenly dumping sewage into the water like it had every right to be there. I took at least 20 photos of that pipe from different angles, making sure to capture the discharge and the surrounding area. The development was called Willow Ridge Estates, a collection of 40 cookie-cutter homes that had been built on what used to be old farmland. I had not been thrilled when construction started, but I had figured as long as they stayed on their side of the property line and did not bother me, we would be fine. The Willow Ridge Homeowners Association had sent me a letter when I first moved in, inviting me to join, even though my property was not technically part of their development. I had politely declined, having no interest in paying fees for services I did not need or want, and certainly no interest in having someone tell me what color I could paint my shutters. Now it looked like they had decided to make my property their personal sewer line. I pulled up the contact information for the Willow Ridge HOA management and dialed the number. A chipper receptionist answered, and I asked to speak with whoever was in charge. After being put on hold for 5 minutes listening to terrible elevator music, a woman with a sharp voice came on the line. "This is Patricia Morgan, HOA president. How can I help you?" Patricia Morgan. Even her name sounded like someone who would complain about your grass being a 1/4 inch too tall. I kept my voice level, professional. "Ms. Morgan, my name is Isaac Zimmerman. I own the property adjacent to Willow Ridge Estates on the eastern border. I'm calling because there's a pipe on the boundary line that is actively dumping raw sewage into the creek that runs through my property." There was a pause. "I'm sorry. What?" "Raw sewage," I repeated slower. "There's a PVC pipe at the property line, and it is discharging what appears to be untreated wastewater directly into my creek. This is an environmental hazard, and it is destroying my property." Another pause. Then her voice came back, cooler this time. "Mr. Zimmerman, I am sure there has been some misunderstanding. Willow Ridge Estates has a fully permitted septic system. Whatever you are seeing in your creek is not our responsibility." "I'm looking at the pipe right now," I said, feeling my jaw tighten. "It is coming from your development, and it is dumping sewage. I need someone to come out here immediately and stop this." "Mr. Zimmerman," Patricia said, and I could hear the condescension dripping from every syllable. "As I said, our system is fully permitted and inspected. If you are having drainage issues on your property, that is not the HOA's concern. Perhaps you should look at your own septic system." "I do not have a septic system," I shot back. "I am on county water and sewer. This is coming from your development, and I have photos and video evidence. Are you going to address this or not?" "Sir, I do not appreciate your tone," Patricia said, her voice going up an octave. "The HOA is not responsible for issues on properties we do not manage. If you continue to harass us with baseless accusations, I will have no choice but to contact our attorney." I could not believe what I was hearing. Baseless accusations? There is literal sewage pouring into my creek right now. "Have a nice day, Mr. Zimmerman." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, rage building in my chest. She had just hung up on me. Not only had she refused to address the problem, she had threatened me with legal action for reporting it. I looked back at the pipe, still steadily pumping brown water into what used to be a pristine creek, and made a decision. If the HOA would not take responsibility, I would go over their heads. I spent the next hour documenting everything I could. I took water samples in mason jars, labeled with date and time. I measured the flow rate coming out of the pipe as best I could. I walked the entire length of the creek on my property, photographing the extent of the contamination. The sewage was flowing downstream, coating everything in its path, killing plants along the bank. I found a dead fish, then another, then a whole school of them floating belly up in a pool. My heart broke looking at them. By 10 in the morning, I was on the phone with the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, or TDEC as everyone called it. I got transferred 3 times before finally reaching someone in the Division of Water Resources who actually seemed to care. Her name was Linda, and she listened without interrupting as I explained the situation. "And you said this is dumping directly into a creek?" Linda asked, her voice serious now. "Yes, madam, a tributary of Beaver Creek. It runs through my property for about half a mile before connecting to the main creek." "And you have photos?" "Photos, videos, water samples, everything. I can send them right now." "Please do. Email them to the address I am about to give you, and reference case number 20260317 TN East 047. I am opening a file right now." "Mr. Zimmerman, what you are describing is a clear violation of the Tennessee Water Quality Control Act. If someone is discharging sewage into state waters without proper treatment and permits, that is extremely serious." Relief flooded through me. Finally, someone who understood. The HOA president told me their system was fully permitted. Then they should have no problem showing us that permit when we come out to inspect, which will be tomorrow morning, first thing. "Can you meet our inspector at 9? "I will be there." "Good. And Mr. Zimmerman, do not drink the water, do not touch it, and keep any pets away from that creek. If that is what you say it is a health hazard." After I hung up, I emailed over all my documentation, then called my neighbor to the west, Tom Bradshaw, who also had creek frontage. Tom was a retired civil engineer, and when I described what was happening, he was at my place within 20 minutes. "Jesus Christ," Tom said, staring at the brown water. "How long has this been going on?" "I do not know. I first noticed the smell this morning, but it could have been flowing at night when I would not have seen it. Could have started days ago for all I know." Tom pulled out his own phone and started taking pictures. "You called TDEC? They are sending an inspector tomorrow." "Good. This is bad, Isaac. Really bad. You have any idea how much environmental damage this could cause? Not to mention the health risks. If that is E. coli getting into the watershed, people downstream could get seriously sick." That thought had not even occurred to me yet, and it made the anger burn hotter. "The HOA president acted like I was making it up," Tom snorted. "Patricia Morgan? Yeah, that sounds about right. She tried to tell me I could not build a workshop on my own property last year because it did not match the aesthetic vision of Willow Ridge. I told her to pound sand since I'm not even in her HOA. Woman is a piece of work. She threatened to sue me for reporting it. Of course she did. HOAs like that, they think they are above the law. They get a little bit of power and it goes straight to their heads. But environmental violations? That is federal and state jurisdiction. She is about to learn she cannot bully her way out of this one. Tom stayed for another hour, helping me document everything from an engineering perspective. He took flow measurements, soil samples from the contaminated banks, and even sketched out a rough map of the drainage system based on the topography. When he left, he promised to be there tomorrow when the inspector came. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that brown water pouring into my creek, destroying everything. I kept getting up to look out the back window as if somehow it might have stopped on its own. It had not. The sodium lights from the Willow Ridge development cast an orange glow over the trees, and I could just make out the dark line of the creek, still flowing with sewage. The TDEC inspector arrived at 8:45 the next morning, 15 minutes early. Her name was Rachel Kim, and she was all business, stepping out of her truck in steel-toed boots and a reflective vest, carrying a clipboard and a large equipment case. Tom showed up right behind her, and the three of us walked down to the creek. Rachel did not say a word as she surveyed the scene, but her expression said everything. She pulled on rubber gloves and waders, then collected water samples in official testing containers, sealing each one with evidence tape. She photographed the pipe from every conceivable angle, measured the discharge, and took GPS coordinates. She walked the entire length of my property line, documenting the extent of the contamination. Finally, after an hour of silent inspection, she turned to me. "Mr. Zimmerman, this is one of the most egregious violations I have seen in 10 years doing this job. That is raw sewage, untreated, directly discharged into state waters. Whoever is responsible for this is in serious trouble." "The pipe is coming from Willow Ridge Estates," I said, pointing toward the development. "I'm going to need to inspect their property and see their wastewater management system. Do you know who I should contact?" I gave her Patricia Morgan's number. Rachel stepped away to make the call, and I could hear her professional but firm tone as she explained that she was with TDEC and needed immediate access to the property to trace the discharge source. There was a long pause. Then Rachel's voice got harder. "Madam, this is not a request. I am a state environmental inspector investigating a water quality violation. I can either conduct this inspection with your cooperation, or I can return with law enforcement and a warrant. Which would you prefer?" Another pause. Then Rachel nodded. "I will be there in 15 minutes. Have the property manager and any relevant documentation ready." She hung up and turned back to us. "The HOA president is not happy, but she agreed to let me inspect. I will let you gentlemen know what I find." Tom and I waited at my house drinking coffee and trying not to speculate too much. 2 hours later, Rachel knocked on my door, and her expression was grim. "I need to show you what I found," she said. We followed her truck up the road to where Willow Ridge Estates connected to the main county road. She pulled into the development, and we drove past rows of identical houses with perfect lawns and decorative mailboxes. At the back of the development, there was a large concrete pad with a pump station and a series of tanks. "This," Rachel said, pointing to the setup, "is their wastewater collection system. It is supposed to collect sewage from all the homes, hold it in these tanks, and then pump it to the main county sewer line twice a day. That is what they have permits for." "Supposed to?" Tom asked. Rachel walked over to the tanks and pointed to a gauge on the side. "These tanks are full. Completely full. Has been for a while based on the condition. When I asked the property manager when they last pumped to the county line, he said the pump broke 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. I felt sick. So for 3 weeks they have just been dumping raw sewage into my creek? It appears so. When the tanks filled up, instead of fixing the pump or arranging emergency pumping service, someone decided to install a bypass pipe. That pipe runs downhill from here, cuts across the corner of the development property, and discharges directly into your creek. Completely illegal, completely unpermitted, and a knowing violation of state and federal environmental law." "Who authorized that?" Tom asked. "That is what I intend to find out. But based on the property manager's reaction when I found it, I do not think he was in on it. I think this came from the HOA board. They did not want to pay for emergency pumping or for an expensive pump repair, so they decided to use your creek as a free sewer system. The rage was so intense, I had to clench my fists to keep my hands from shaking." "What happens now?" Rachel pulled out her phone and started typing. "Now I file an emergency order to cease discharge immediately. They have until close of business today to stop that flow, either by fixing their pump or arranging pumping service. Then I file a formal notice of violation. Then comes the fun part. Calculating penalties. Penalties? Tennessee Water Quality Control Act allows for civil penalties of up to $10,000 per day per violation, and this is multiple violations: unpermitted discharge, discharge of raw sewage, discharge into state waters, failure to maintain required equipment. I'm still tallying it up, but we are looking at substantial fines. Per day? Tom asked, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Per day? For every day the violation occurred, and since they have been doing this for 3 weeks, that is 21 days so far, and counting until they stop it. I did a quick mental calculation. If each violation carried a $10,000 fine, and there were multiple violations, they could be looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. Good, I said, and I meant it. Rachel left to file her emergency order, and Tom and I drove back to my property. The sewage was still flowing, but according to Rachel, it would not be for much longer. I spent the rest of the day monitoring the pipe, watching that brown water destroy my creek, documenting every minute of it. At 4:30 that afternoon, I heard vehicles rumbling up the road. I walked up to the main road and saw a convoy of 3 pump trucks heading toward Willow Ridge Estates. 20 minutes later, the flow from the pipe slowed, then stopped entirely. The emergency pumping had begun. I called Rachel to confirm. They stopped the discharge, she said. Barely made the deadline, but the damage is done. I have been running the numbers, and this is going to be expensive for them. How expensive? I am recommending penalties of $15,000 per day for the unpermitted discharge, another $10,000 per day for discharging untreated wastewater, and $5,000 per day for failure to maintain required equipment. That is $30,000 per day for 21 days so far, $630,000, and that is just the state penalties. EPA might want to get involved since this affects navigable waters downstream. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. They are going to fight this, are they not? Oh, absolutely. People always do. But Mr. Zimmerman, I have been doing this long enough to know a slam dunk case when I see one. You documented everything perfectly. I have water samples proving sewage contamination. I have photos of the illegal discharge pipe. The property manager confirmed they have been bypassing their system for 3 weeks. They have no defense here. What about cleanup? My creek is destroyed. That is part of the order. They are required to implement a remediation plan within 30 days. That means removing contaminated sediment, replanting native vegetation, monitoring water quality until it returns to baseline levels. And they pay for all of it. After I hung up, I walked back down to the creek. The flow had stopped, but the damage remained. Brown scum clung to the banks. Dead fish floated in the shallows. The smell lingered in the humid afternoon air. It would take months, maybe years, for this ecosystem to recover. But at least it would recover. At least someone was finally holding the HOA accountable. That evening, I got a phone call from a number I did not recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mr. Zimmerman, this is Patricia Morgan. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the rage underneath. I am calling to inform you that your harassment of the Willow Ridge HOA will not be tolerated. You have cost us a significant amount of money with your false accusations, and we will be pursuing legal action. I almost laughed. False accusations? Patricia, the state inspector found your illegal bypass pipe. She took samples of the raw sewage you dumped into my creek for 3 weeks. There is nothing false about any of this. We had a minor equipment malfunction. We were addressing it. By dumping sewage onto my property, that is your idea of addressing it? The board made a temporary operational decision during a time of unexpected maintenance issues. We had every intention of resolving it properly. 3 weeks is not temporary, and installing an illegal discharge pipe is not resolving it properly. You used my property as your personal sewer because you did not want to pay for emergency pumping. How dare you, Patricia hissed, and there was the real anger breaking through. Do you have any idea how much this is going to cost the HOA? Those fines are going to require a special assessment. Homeowners are going to have to pay thousands of dollars because you could not just mind your own business. Mind my own business? You dumped sewage into my creek, you destroyed my property, and now you are trying to make me the bad guy because you are facing consequences for breaking the law. We are going to sue you for every penny this costs us: harassment, defamation, filing false reports. When we are done, you will wish you had never. I hung up on her. My hands were shaking with anger. The absolute audacity of this woman, trying to blame me for reporting their illegal dumping, trying to threaten me with lawsuits because they got caught breaking environmental law. I immediately called Rachel and left her a voicemail explaining that the HOA president had just threatened me with legal action for reporting the violation. She called me back within 10 minutes. Mr. Zimmerman, please document any and all contact you have with the HOA going forward. Record calls if you can, save emails and texts. Threatening someone for reporting environmental violations is retaliation, and that is a separate offense. If they keep it up, we can add that to the charges. They can do that? Sue me for reporting them? They can try. They will lose, and it will cost them even more money in legal fees. But some people are too stubborn to know when to cut their losses. Keep documenting everything. You are the victim here, not them. Over the next week, the Willow Ridge HOA hired emergency contractors to fix their pump system and begin pumping their tanks to the county sewer line the way they were supposed to have been doing all along. I watched the trucks come and go, satisfied that at least the immediate problem was solved. But the water in my creek was still contaminated, still brown and foul-smelling. Fish continued to wash up dead. The ecosystem was in shock. TDEC sent me a copy of the formal notice of violation they issued to Willow Ridge Estates, HOA. It was 14 pages long, detailing every violation, every day of illegal discharge, every regulation they had broken. The recommended penalties totaled $630,000 for the initial 3-week period. But the notice also included a kicker. The fines would continue to accrue at $30,000 per day until the HOA submitted and implemented a complete remediation plan approved by TDEC. I was not a vindictive person by nature, but reading that notice felt good. The HOA had treated my property like garbage, threatened me for standing up for myself, and showed zero remorse for the damage they caused. Now they were learning that actions had consequences. 2 weeks after the initial violation was discovered, I received a letter from a law firm in Knoxville. It was a formal demand letter accusing me of harassment, trespassing, interfering with HOA business, and making false reports to state agencies. They demanded I sign a statement retracting my complaint to TDEC and pay the HOA $15,000 for their legal fees, or they would file suit. I read the letter twice, then called the attorney whose name was on the letterhead. A receptionist answered, and I asked to speak with Jonathan Hartley, the attorney who signed the letter. "This is Jonathan Hartley," a smooth voice said. "Mr. Hartley, my name is Isaac Zimmerman. I just received your demand letter regarding the Willow Ridge HOA matter." "Ah, yes, Mr. Zimmerman. My clients are prepared to resolve this matter amicably if you are willing to cooperate. Your clients dumped raw sewage into my creek for 3 weeks. The state has documented evidence of their illegal discharge. What exactly would I be retracting?" There was a pause. "Mr. Zimmerman, I think there has been some misunderstanding about the nature of the issue. My clients had a temporary equipment failure. The state's response has been disproportionate, and your initial complaint exaggerated the severity of the situation. I have photos of raw sewage flowing into my creek. I have dead fish. I have water samples proving fecal contamination. The state inspector found their illegal bypass pipe. What part of that is exaggerated?" Another pause, longer this time. "Nevertheless, my clients feel that your actions have caused undue harm to the HOA and its members. They are prepared to pursue all legal remedies. Then, I suggest you talk to your clients about the consequences of filing a retaliatory lawsuit against someone for reporting environmental violations. I have been told by TDEC that such retaliation is itself a violation. But please, feel free to file suit. I will enjoy watching you explain to a judge why your clients thought dumping sewage into state waters was acceptable." I hung up before he could respond. My heart was racing, but I felt good. I was done being pushed around by these people. I called Rachel at TDEC again and sent her a copy of the demand letter. This is the second threat I have gotten from them. First, the HOA president, now their attorney. Rachel let out a low whistle. They really do not know when to quit, do they? I'm adding this to the file. Threatening a complainant with legal action is textbook retaliation. That is going to make their situation much worse when this goes to hearing. Hearing? The HOA has 30 days to respond to the notice of violation. They can either accept the penalties and implement remediation, or they can request a contested case hearing and try to fight it. Based on their behavior so far, I am guessing they will fight. Let them fight. I have got all the evidence anyone could need. So do we. And Mr. Zimmerman, you might want to consider getting your own attorney, not because you need to defend yourself, you have done nothing wrong, but because you are going to want to file a civil suit against them for property damage. The state penalties go to the state. You deserve compensation too. I had not even thought about that, but she was right. My property value had taken a hit. I had cleanup costs. I had dead vegetation and a contaminated creek that would take years to fully recover. The HOA had caused all of that damage, and they should pay for it. I called a local environmental attorney named David Chen, who had good reviews online. When I explained the situation, he asked me to come in the next day with all my documentation. I showed up at his office in downtown Knoxville with a binder full of photos, videos, water sample records, the TDEC reports, and copies of the threatening communications from the HOA. David flipped through the binder, his expression growing more serious with each page. Finally, he looked up at me. Mr. Zimmerman, this is one of the most clear-cut property damage cases I have ever seen. You documented everything perfectly. You have state agency support, and the defendants are on record threatening you for reporting their illegal conduct. I would be happy to take this case. What are we looking at in terms of damages? Property damage, cost of remediation, diminished property value, emotional distress, and possibly punitive damages given their conduct. I would estimate your actual damages in the range of $200,000 to $300,000, with punitive damages potentially much more. And given their financial situation with the state fines, we might be able to negotiate a quick settlement. I want them to fix my creek. That is the most important thing. TDEC is going to require that anyway, but we can make sure it is done right and that you have input on the remediation plan. We will file suit within the week. True to his word, David filed a civil complaint against the Willow Ridge Estates HOA 5 days later. The complaint laid out everything: the illegal dumping, the property damage, the threats and retaliation, and the ongoing harm to my land. We asked for $350,000 in damages, plus the cost of remediation and attorney fees. The local newspaper picked up on the story. A reporter named Jennifer called me, asking for an interview. I agreed, and the next week there was a full article on the front page of the local section. HOA faces state fines, lawsuit after dumping sewage into neighbor's creek. The article included photos I had provided, quotes from Rachel at TDEC confirming the violations, and even managed to get a no comment from Patricia Morgan. After the article ran, my phone started ringing. Other property owners near Willow Ridge called to say they had noticed odd smells and discoloration in the creek too, but had not known what was causing it. A couple who lived downstream said their kids had played in the creek during the time of the discharge and had gotten sick afterward. They asked for David's contact information to explore their own legal options. The HOA's attorney, Jonathan Hartley, dropped them as clients 2 weeks after the newspaper article. I found out because I got a notice that the HOA had hired new representation, this time a firm out of Nashville that specialized in environmental litigation defense. The new attorney, Margaret Foster, called me directly. Mr. Zimmerman, I am Margaret Foster, newly retained counsel for Willow Ridge HOA. I have been reviewing the case file, and I would like to discuss settlement options if you are amenable. I was surprised by the professional, non-threatening tone. I am listening. My clients made serious mistakes in how they handled their equipment failure. They compounded those mistakes by attempting to intimidate you rather than taking responsibility. I have advised them that their best option is to accept the state penalties, implement full remediation, and negotiate a fair settlement with you for your property damages. Why the change in strategy? Margaret sighed. Between you and me, Mr. Zimmerman, the previous board president, Patricia Morgan, was not listening to good legal advice. She has since been removed from the board by the other members. The new board president is a retired accountant who understands that fighting this is going to cost far more than settling it. They are facing over $600,000 in state fines, your lawsuit, potential lawsuits from other affected property owners, and the cost of remediation. They cannot afford to drag this out. What are you proposing? The HOA will accept full responsibility for the illegal discharge. They will pay all state fines without contest. They will implement a remediation plan approved by both TDEC and an independent environmental consultant of your choosing. And they will pay you $250,000 to settle your civil claims, plus cover your attorney fees. In exchange, you agree not to pursue further damages or engage with the media about the case. I told her I would discuss it with my attorney and get back to her. David and I talked it over, and he advised me that it was a strong offer. You could potentially get more if we go to trial, but trials take years and cost a lot in legal fees. This is a bird-in-hand situation. They are offering you substantial compensation, they are taking responsibility, and they are fixing the creek. That is everything you wanted. He was right. I had never wanted to drag this out or become some kind of environmental crusader. I just wanted my creek fixed and to be compensated for the damage. If the HOA was finally willing to do the right thing, I was willing to settle. We negotiated a few details, including that the remediation plan had to be approved by both TDEC and an environmental consultant I selected, and that the HOA would have to post a bond to ensure the work was completed, even if they ran out of money. Margaret agreed to everything. 3 weeks after her initial call, we signed a settlement agreement. The HOA cut me a check for $250,000. They paid my attorney fees, another $40,000. They accepted the TDEC penalties, which had grown to over $700,000 by the time they formally agreed to stop contesting them. And they hired an environmental remediation firm to begin the long process of cleaning up the creek. The remediation took 6 months. Crews came in and removed contaminated sediment from the creek bed. They treated the soil along the banks. They replanted with native species, hundreds of trees and shrubs that would help filter runoff and stabilize the banks. They installed monitoring wells to track water quality recovery. I was involved in every step, approving plans and checking on progress. During those 6 months, the TDEC fines continued to accrue because the HOA had not completed the remediation. $30,000 per day, every single day, until the work was done and water quality tests showed the creek had recovered to acceptable levels. By the time the remediation was certified complete, the total state fines exceeded $1.6 million. The HOA had to levy a special assessment on every homeowner in Willow Ridge Estates. Each of the 40 homes had to pay over $40,000 to cover the fines, the remediation costs, my settlement, and the other legal expenses. I heard through the grapevine that several families had to take out second mortgages. 3 homes went into foreclosure. Property values in the development dropped by 30%. I felt bad for the innocent homeowners who had nothing to do with the decision to dump sewage into my creek, but I also knew they had elected the HOA board. They had given those board members the authority to make decisions on their behalf. And when those board members broke the law rather than spend money on proper maintenance, the homeowners had to bear the financial consequences. Maybe next time they would pay more attention to who they elected and how their HOA was managed. As for Patricia Morgan, the former HOA president, I found out she had moved out of Willow Ridge Estates 2 months after being removed from the board. The other homeowners had not been kind to her once they found out she was the one who had authorized the illegal discharge. She sold her house at a loss and left the county entirely. I did not waste any energy feeling sorry for her. By September, 6 months after I first smelled that awful sewage stench from my deck, the creek had been certified as clean. The water ran clear again. New plants lined the banks, still small but growing fast. Fish had returned, restocking naturally from populations upstream. I saw a blue heron fishing in the shallows one morning and deer tracks in the mud. It was not exactly like it had been before. The ecosystem had been shocked, and it would take years to fully recover. Some species would never come back. But it was alive again, clean again. And I had won. The HOA had paid in full for what they had done, both to the state and to me. The law had worked the way it was supposed to, holding polluters accountable and making them restore what they had damaged. I stood on my back deck on a Saturday morning in October, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the Tennessee hills orange and gold. The creek burbled peacefully below, clear and clean and smelling only of water and earth. It was not perfect, but it was mine again. Tom came over later that day, and we walked down to the creek together. He had been with me through the whole ordeal, helping document evidence, attending meetings with TDEC, providing expert testimony for my lawsuit. More than that, he had been a friend when I needed one. "Looks good," Tom said, watching the water flow. "You did good, Isaac." "We did good. Could not have done it without you." "You know what the best part is?" Tom asked with a grin. "Every HOA in this county now knows they cannot pull this garbage. TDEC used your case as an example in their quarterly enforcement report. They sent out notices to every HOA and development in Tennessee, reminding them of their wastewater obligations and citing the penalties from your case. You probably saved a dozen other creeks from the same fate." I had not thought about it that way, but he was right. The case had made headlines across the state. Environmental groups had written about it. TDEC had used it as a teaching moment. Maybe something good had come out of the whole nightmare after all. "Think Patricia ever regrets her decision?" I asked. Tom laughed. "Patricia Morgan? That woman will go to her grave blaming everyone but herself. But the next HOA president who thinks about cutting corners on environmental compliance, they will remember what happened here and think twice." We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the creek flow. A year ago, I had been standing in almost the same spot, watching sewage pour into my water, feeling helpless and angry. Now the creek was clean. I had been compensated for my damages, and the HOA had learned an expensive lesson about accountability. "You going to join their HOA now?" Tom asked with a smirk. I snorted. "Not a chance. I like my property exactly the way it is, and I do not need anyone telling me what to do with it. Besides, they probably could not afford my membership dues after what I cost them." Tom laughed at that, and we headed back up to the house. I grilled burgers for lunch, and we sat on the deck, enjoying the October sunshine and the sound of the creek running clean below. The following week, I got a letter from the new Willow Ridge HOA board president, a man named Robert Sullivan. It was short and to the point. "On behalf of the Willow Ridge HOA, I want to formally apologize for the harm caused to your property by the previous board's decisions. We have implemented new oversight procedures to ensure nothing like this ever happens again. We hope to be good neighbors going forward." It was not much, but it was something. An acknowledgement of wrongdoing, an apology, a commitment to do better. I wrote back thanking him for the letter and saying I looked forward to a better relationship with the new board. I never heard from Patricia Morgan again. According to Tom, she had moved to Florida and was now living in a condo community with an even stricter HOA than Willow Ridge had been. The irony was not lost on either of us. Life slowly returned to normal. I spent my weekends working on my property, planting more trees, building a small stone wall along part of the creek bank. The physical work was therapeutic after months of stress and legal battles. I watched the creek every day, monitoring its recovery, celebrating each small sign of returning life. In November, Rachel from TDEC called to tell me that the Willow Ridge case had been officially closed. All fines had been paid in full, all remediation had been completed to standard, and the water quality monitoring showed sustained improvement. The case was now part of the public record, a warning to anyone else who thought they could ignore environmental laws. "You should be proud, Mr. Zimmerman," Rachel said. "A lot of people would have just complained and done nothing. You documented everything, you followed through, and you held them accountable. That is not easy. I just wanted my creek back." "Well, you got it. And you got justice. Not everyone can say that." After we hung up, I walked down to the creek one more time. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, still holding most of their autumn leaves. The water sparkled as it flowed over smooth stones. I could see minnows darting in the shallows. A turtle sunned itself on a log. It looked almost like it had before, just with younger plants and cleaner gravel. I thought about everything that had happened over the past 8 months. The initial shock and anger, the documentation and phone calls, the state inspection, and the confirmation of the violations, the threats from the HOA, the lawsuit, the settlement, the months of remediation work, and finally, the recovery. It had been exhausting and stressful. There had been days when I wondered if it was worth it, if I should just drop everything and try to move on, but standing there looking at the clean, clear water, I knew I had made the right choice. Some things were worth fighting for. My property, my water, my peace of mind, the environment we all shared. The HOA had thought they could get away with dumping sewage because it was cheaper than doing the right thing. They had thought they could intimidate me into backing down. They had thought their permits and their attorneys and their position of authority would protect them from consequences. They had been wrong on every count. The state had hit them with daily fines that accumulated to over $1.6 million. I had sued them and won a substantial settlement. Other affected homeowners had filed their own claims. Their property values had tanked. Their reputation was destroyed. And all because they had tried to save a few $1,000s on emergency pumping by using my creek as an illegal sewer. Was I vindictive for pursuing it so aggressively? Maybe. But I did not think so. I had not asked for any of this. I'd been minding my own business, living peacefully on my property, when they violated environmental law and destroyed my creek. All I had done was document the damage and report it to the appropriate authorities. Everything that happened after that was the natural consequence of their illegal actions. If that made me the bad guy in their eyes, I could live with that. As winter approached, I started planning for spring. I wanted to add a small fishing dock on the creek, now that the water was clean enough to support healthy fish populations again. I wanted to plant more wildflowers along the banks to attract pollinators. I wanted to install some trail cameras to capture the wildlife that used the creek corridor. My property was mine again, fully and completely. The threat from the HOA was gone. The water was clean. And I had learned something valuable about standing up for myself and not backing down when I was in the right. On Christmas Eve, I stood on my deck with a bourbon in hand, watching snow begin to fall softly on the trees in the creek below. It was peaceful and quiet, the way it was supposed to be, the way it would stay, now that I had fought for it and won. I raised my glass toward the creek in a silent toast, to clean water, to accountability, to justice, and to never, ever joining a homeowners association. The snow continued to fall, dusting everything in white, covering the creek banks with a clean blanket. By morning, my property would look pristine and untouched, like nothing bad had ever happened here. And that was fine with me. The past was past. The violations had been addressed. The penalties had been paid. The creek was recovering. I went inside, started a fire in the fireplace, and settled in for a quiet holiday. Outside, the creek flowed on, cold and clear and clean under the falling snow. Tomorrow I would walk down and check on it again, like I did every day. But tonight, I was content to just know it was there, restored and protected, exactly the way it should be. The fight had been worth it. Every phone call, every document, every hearing, every stressful conversation with attorneys and inspectors. My sanctuary had been violated, and I had fought back the only way a citizen could, by documenting the violations, reporting them to the proper authorities, and letting the law take its course. The system had worked. Slowly, imperfectly, but it had worked. The polluters had been punished, the damage had been repaired, the victim had been compensated, and everyone involved had learned that environmental laws existed for a reason and carried serious consequences when violated. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I thought about Patricia Morgan and whether she ever regretted her decision to dump sewage into my creek. Probably not. People like that rarely took responsibility for their actions. They always found someone else to blame, some excuse to justify their behavior. But it did not matter what she thought or felt. What mattered was that she had faced consequences. Real, substantial, expensive consequences. Consequences that sent a message to every other HOA in Tennessee that they could not violate environmental laws with impunity. The next morning, I woke to a winter wonderland. Everything was covered in 4 inches of fresh snow. I bundled up and walked down to the creek, my boots crunching in the snow. The water was nearly black against the white banks, still flowing strong despite the cold. Ice was beginning to form along the edges, delicate crystal formations that glittered in the morning sun. It was beautiful. It was clean. It was mine. I spent the rest of the winter enjoying my property and monitoring the creek's continued recovery. The plants I had installed in the fall were dormant but alive, their root systems growing strong underground. When spring came, they would burst into life, adding even more filtration and stability to the banks. By March, a full year after the nightmare had begun, the creek was thriving. Early spring rains had swelled the flow, and I watched as the water carved new channels around obstacles the way healthy creeks were supposed to do. Frogs began calling from the shallows, birds returned to nest in the trees along the banks. The ecosystem was healing itself, the way nature always did when given a chance. I never forgot what the HOA had done to my property. The memory of that brown water pouring from the illegal pipe would stay with me forever. But I had turned that anger and frustration into action. I had documented everything meticulously. I had reported it to the right authorities. I had stood my ground when threatened, and I had seen justice served. The HOA had paid over $1.6 million in state fines, paid me $250,000 in settlement, paid for complete remediation of the creek, and suffered enormous damage to their reputation and property values. All because they had tried to save a few $1,000s by dumping sewage where they thought no one would notice or care. They had been wrong about that. I had noticed. I had cared, and I had made them pay for every single day they polluted my water. As I stood on my deck that anniversary morning, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the Tennessee hills gold, I felt satisfied. Not happy about what had happened, but satisfied with how I had handled it. I had done everything right. I had let the system work, and the system had delivered justice. The creek flowed clean below me, sparkling in the morning light. Fish jumped in the shallows. A heron stood motionless on a rock waiting for breakfast. Deer moved carefully down to drink, their reflections perfect in the still pools. This was what I had fought for. This moment, this peace, this clean water flowing through my property the way it was meant to. And I would do it all again if I had to, without hesitation. Because some things were worth fighting for, no matter how long it took or how hard it was. Your home, your property, your little piece of the world, and the natural resources we all depended on, whether we realized it or not. The HOA had learned that lesson the hard way, and I had learned that one person, armed with documentation and determination, could take on an organization with attorneys and insurance and money, and win. It was a good lesson for both of us. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and headed down to the creek to start my day. There was always work to be done, maintenance to perform, monitoring to conduct. But it was good work, satisfying work, caring for a piece of land that I had fought to protect. And every single day, when I saw that clean water flowing through my property, I knew the fight had been worth it.